Do you ever feel like you're stuck at good enough and can't quite break into pro level editing? After 20 years editing broadcast TV commercials, I know exactly what makes the difference. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to go pro in only 90 minutes. We'll cover comedy editing, documentary editing, cross-cutting, contrast, emotion, and more. And you'll get hands-on with real exercises along the way. First, I'm going to show you how to add drama to any edit. Have you ever struggled with building tension or suspense in your edits? Today I'd like to invite you into my edit suite so I can show you a simple technique that makes scenes feel more intense and keeps the audience on the edge of their seats. By the end of this short video, you'll be able to take this approach into your own edits and instantly make your scenes more dynamic and suspenseful. Let me start with this. Imagine a forest fire. The flames are spreading rapidly, smoke is thick, the danger is immediate. On its own, that's very terrifying, the stakes are high. Every moment counts. Now think of a different scene, a traffic jam. We all hate being stuck in traffic. The cars are gridlocked, horns are blaring, frustration is mounting. On its own, that's also very stressful. The tension comes from being trapped, wanting to move more quickly. Now imagine both of these things happening at the same time. There's a forest fire advancing and you're stuck in a traffic jam. Suddenly, the tension isn't just doubled, it increases exponentially. The technique I'm going to show you is called cross-cutting, when two sequences, each building tension on their own, are intercut to make the overall scene feel far more intense than either part alone. I'm in Premiere Pro here, and before I show you the technique in action, I want to talk about the three ingredients that make cross-cutting work in your edits. The first ingredient is simply two scenes that you can intercut. But the key here is that each scene should have tension or stakes on its own. If the two scenes are flat to begin with individually, the combined impact still will be pretty flat. The second ingredient is a visual contrast between the two scenes. And this could be a lot of different things. Think about what if one has handheld footage, what if the other has static footage? One is dark, one could have light imagery. It could be the pace at which you cut two of the different scenes. Maybe you use a slow rhythm for one and a more dynamic fast rhythm for the other. The third ingredient is audio contrast. Give each scene a different feel. Maybe one has quiet, realistic sound effects and the other has more subjective sounds. Maybe one has music or score and the other one doesn't. Maybe one is really loud and one is really quiet. It's a bit counterintuitive, but the visual and audio contrasts can actually make the cuts work better. It's sort of embracing the jarring nature of cross-cutting. Now, before I show you some cross-cutting in action, I want to let you know that I linked to the artless stock footage I used to put together my example, so go download it and give it a try. Just remember, try to create two different scenes that build tension on their own, then intercut them using some of those visual and audio contrast ideas that I laid out for you. And now let's take a look at the exercise I put together using those artless clips to illustrate cross-cutting. How many editing techniques do you think we can learn from a single 30-second commercial? I've been a pro editor for over 20 years, and today I'd like to invite you into my edit suite so we can take a look at a commercial I recently completed. Over my career, I've landed on 5 editing criteria: emotion, story, rhythm, sound, and action. So we're going to look at the spot from those 5 different angles. And at the end of the video, I'm going to share something about the commercial editing process that you probably haven't heard before. Let's take a look at the spot.
A little to the left, please. Thank you. A little more.
I'm okay! Get your money working. Get 0% interest when you open a new Visa credit card at America First.
First up is emotion. In particular, what emotions am I trying to evoke from the audience? To me, emotion should be the North Star of every project. It's not an editing technique in and of itself, but rather it's the foundation on which I make all of my other editing decisions. So what was I thinking when this script first came across my desk? Well, it's a comedy, so we want the audience to laugh or at least smile when they see it. And where's that comedy coming from? I think for this concept, it's the juxtaposition between this couple relaxing on vacation and the $50 bill doing all the work. So I decided from the outset I would do whatever I could to highlight that juxtaposition. There's also a nice physical comedy element of the bill balancing on the ladder and struggling, and the fall and the crash. So my emotional North Star is to get a laugh out of the audience, or at least a smile, and I'm going to do this by highlighting the juxtaposition of the couple relaxing and the bill having a hard time. Now let's talk story. I like to look at story from two different perspectives. Whenever you have two shots cut together, they tell a story, but you also have the underlying structure of the entire commercial. Let's look at a couple places where we really focused on story in terms of shot-to-shot editing. First, we have a close-up of the woman relaxing and then cutting to the bill in the wide shot.
A little to the left, please. Thank you.
A couple shots later, we do that again, but this time we cut from a close-up of the woman asking for more help, and then a close-up of the bill exasperated.
A little more.
We don't have all of the pieces of 3-act story structure, but we do have some key elements. You could say that the opening shot is setting up our ordinary world, and then we have a complication. The woman wants her face out of the sun. We have rising tension as the bill struggles to shade her face. And then finally, we have a climax where the bill falls down. And at the end of the spot, you could call that a resolution or a purposeful lack of resolution. Let's talk rhythm. One tip I give editors who are working on their rhythm is to try single track editing, like I have here. You can see all of my video clips are on one track, and I've even color-coded them to make it even more clear. Now when I look at my timeline, I can see this has a nice rhythm to it. In fact, I can even see a point of rhythmic contrast, where I go from one rhythm to a faster rhythm, and that's when the bill falls from the ladder. This was intentional. I wanted to add intensity to the fall. Sometimes I'll use rhythmic contrast to make a point, like I did here, and other times I want rhythm to be invisible, sort of like a great bass player in a band. You might not be able to notice the bass playing in the mix, but if you took it out, the song would fall apart. Now on to sound. There's some sound design at the beginning of this spot that I feel are really integral to the story, including this person diving into the pool off screen. Using sounds of things happening off screen can increase the size of your world without having to show it. We also have this nice tropical soundtrack, which gives you vacation vibes. And there's some really subtle seagulls and waves to round out the ambience. And this relaxing vacation world we've created is contrasted once we see the bill, where we hear a creak in the ladder as he struggles to balance, and his exasperated sigh.
Thank you.
A little later in the spot, we really add to the comedy with a body impact fall and the breaking of dishes.
I'm okay!
And at the end of the spot, we have one of my favorite juxtapositions where the bill is begrudgingly getting back up on the ladder and the man takes a loud sip of his drink. Now let's talk about where we cut. The woman begins to look around in shot 1 and finishes looking around in shot 2. I use the action of the woman closing her lips as the out point of shot 2, and then we reveal the wide shot of the bill. In the wide shot of the bill, I'm focusing on the action of the bill lifting his left leg and then cutting out after his body settles. And then we cut into a nice close-up. I cut into the close-up at the beginning of the eye roll, and I cut out after he glances over at the woman, leading us nicely into the next shot. This is often referred to as a glance object cut. You show the eyes looking somewhere, and then you cut to what they're looking at. We have another shot of the woman here, and for the out point, I again used her lips closing and settling. And the shots of the bill falling are another nice match on action, where the bill starts falling in the close-up and finishes the fall in the wide shot.
I'm okay!
That takes us to the art card, and then at the end of the spot, we have an additional joke, which in the commercial world is called a button. We have a single shot, and my in and out points are focused on the man picking up the drink and then taking a sip. One quick tip. When cutting comedy, I found that it often helps to cut things tight. So for instance, on the out point of the shot of the man sipping his drink, I wanted to cut out right on the frame he finished his sip, or even interrupt the sip a little by a couple of frames. I find this helps make the joke pop. Now I'd like to share a little something about the commercial editing process. One of the dangers of analyzing this final edit with you all is that you might think this was my first try. So I went back and looked at my project file and found that this was sequence 34. That means I tried 34 different variations of this 30-second spot before landing on this version. More importantly, I got feedback on those 34 versions with trusted collaborators, namely the director and the creative directors. And we landed on what we thought was the most impactful version of the edit. Today, I'd like to invite you into my edit suite as I share an in-depth look at my process for editing a viral commercial that was created with today's latest technology and effects. It was directed by veteran commercial director Scott Rice, and it was shot by Jimmy Lindsay, an Emmy-nominated cinematographer. It was shot on a virtual production stage outside of Austin, Texas, and as you'll see, the main character is 3D animated. Let's take a look. After importing the raw footage and audio and syncing it together, I like to organize it in one long sequence I call a string out. I organize it in story order, and by utilizing screenshots, labels, and markers, I'm able to easily navigate to the shot and take I need. Check out how quickly I can navigate this footage by using hotkeys that'll take me to the next marker or previous marker. One tip I'd like to share is that I organize my takes last to first. And if you think about the process of shooting, that makes sense. Because as the director gives direction, as the camera gets more comfortable, as the actors get more comfortable, things are getting better. So, in general, the last takes are usually the best takes, and that's what I like to start with. Another tip I'd like to share when prepping your string out is to be on the lookout for usable frames before the director calls action and after the director calls cut. Every piece of recorded media is fair game for use in your final edit, and you never know when those extra frames are going to save you. Once your string out is complete, grab some popcorn, sit back, and watch through it 2 to 3 times while taking notes. I find that if I'm well organized and very familiar with all the raw footage, I'm already 70% of the way to a great edit. Let's get into the edit. In addition to the footage and audio recorded on set, a voice actor was hired to play the part of the main character. So one of the biggest challenges with a spot like this is I'm actually editing invisible action because the visual effects process doesn't start until after picture lock. So let's take a look at the full spot without the 3D animated main character.
Let's see, string cheese, ooh, soda.
Surprise! You have a brother.
Hi. Whoa. Why didn't you tell me before?
Well, we just got him.
For opening a new account at America First Credit Union.
Which, surprise number 2, you're moving out and living at America First.
Huh? Get your money working. For a limited time, new members get a cash bonus when they open a checking account.
One editing trick I use all the time, but was especially helpful in a case like this, is to cut with the visuals turned off, as if you're editing a radio spot. If the pacing and performance of the audio is working by itself, you know you're on the right track. Conversely, in other situations, I will edit with the audio turned off, so I can check the rhythm, pacing, in and out points of my visuals without being affected by what the audio is doing. I find that if both the audio and the visuals stand alone, when you put them together, you have something really solid. This is where it starts to get really fun. We already had the voice performance locked, but we brought in a performer and recorded their facial expressions while they lip-synced to the final audio. These facial captures allowed us to build out our edit, and they also gave the 3D animator, Greg Almelchuk, a great head start when animating facial expressions and dialogue. Let's watch the whole spot with the facial captures cut in.
Let's see, string cheese, ooh, soda.
Surprise! You have a brother.
Hi. Whoa. Why didn't you tell me before?
Well, we just got him.
For opening a new account at America First Credit Union.
Which, surprise number 2, you're moving out and living at America First.
Huh? Get your money working. For a limited time, new members get a cash bonus when they open a checking account.
One thing I wanted to point out was how I used the motion panel and keyframes to move the facial captures around in order to simulate the blocking of the final scene. This really helps everybody involved get a visual sense of how the final VFX are going to look and play out. So don't be afraid to dive into details like that at this stage. It's always a treat to see final animation bring the project to life, and that's what we have here. Let's take a look at the whole thing, and then I'll point out some details.
Let's see, string cheese. Ooh, soda.
Surprise! You have a brother.
Hi. Whoa. Why didn't you tell me before?
Well, we just got him.
For opening a new account at America First Credit Union.
Which, surprise number 2, you're moving out and living at America First.
Get your money working. For a limited time, new members get a cash bonus when they open a checking account.
If you're wondering why the image here is flat now, it's because we've moved back into a log color space, because the next step is to send this off for color grading, and we want to give our colorist, Brandon Thomas, as much flexibility as possible. Along those lines, our animator actually has delivered much of the animation in multiple layers. You see we have our background plate on this shot, this plate, and then this plate. Similarly, on this shot, we have our background, then we have this, and then we have this. So by delivering multiple layers, it really gives a ton of flexibility in color. In our earlier cuts, I had put on what's called a LUT, which stands for lookup table, which converts the raw color space into something more standard that the human eye is used to on a final image. And now we get to final delivery. You'll see that my sound design is now replaced by a nice stereo sound mix, the VFX shots are now replaced with final color renders, and we have final graphics. Before I show you the final piece, I want to give a huge shout out to executive producer, director Scott Rice for allowing me to share this with you, and to the entire ultra-talented post team, including Greg Almelchuk, who did the 3D animation, colorist Brandon Thomas, and re-recording mixer David Bewley. Let's take a look.
Let's see, string cheese. Ooh, soda.
Surprise! You have a brother.
Hi. Whoa. Why didn't you tell me before?
Well, we just got him.
For opening a new account at America First Credit Union.
Which, surprise number 2, you're moving out and living at America First.
Get your money working. For a limited time, new members get a cash bonus when they open a checking account.
Follow these rules when editing comedy and you can land the joke every time. I've been a pro editor for over 20 years with a particular focus on editing comedic commercials, and I'm going to share 3 rules that have made a big impact on my editing career. Stick around to the end for a bonus tip. Early in my career, I can remember sitting in my edit suite waiting for a director to come by so I could preview for him the latest cut of his comedy commercial that I was working on. The director comes in, sits down, and I eagerly press play to show off my latest edit, and it gets to the big punchline in the commercial, and silence. Something was off, no reaction. And the director says, "Hey, why don't you try cutting it a little tighter after the punchline?" And I said, "Well, it's already cut pretty tight. It's only a matter of frames." And he said, "No, cut it so tight that you're almost cutting off the end of the punchline." So I tried it. Then I played the commercial again. Not only did the director laugh at the punchline this time, but so did I. Those 6 frames were the difference between the joke falling flat and the joke landing. That's 1/4 of a second. So my first rule for editing comedy is cut it tight. If you're cutting a dialogue scene, for instance, you should cut it faster than reality. The actors might not have time to breathe, for instance. Is it a visual punchline? Cut away quickly, don't linger. That abrupt cut is often what triggers the laugh. Another thing I learned that day, there's no substitute for watching your work with someone else in the room, and I think it's especially true for comedy. As an editor, you can become numb to the comedy after your first few edits. By bringing somebody else into the room and watching it with them, it allows you to experience it through their eyes, giving you a fresh perspective, and that's worth its weight in gold. Of course, there are exceptions to this rule, especially jokes that are built on lingering too long, creating an awkward pause or moment. The key here is that these longer edits are deliberate. For instance, one effective way to use a long, lingering cut is to contrast it with a tightly cut setup. Maybe there's a big commotion and then the actors freeze and look at each other in silence. and you linger just a little too long and that triggers a laugh. When we start cutting comedy, we're almost always focused on the punchline. But more often than not, it's the reaction shots that get the laugh. Maybe it's cutting to a character's stunned face, or a double take, or it's a slow blink that gets the laugh. And if you have lots of options, try them all, because you never know what's going to be the funniest. I think one reason reaction shots are so effective in comedy is because the person reacting in the scene can almost be an avatar for the audience, and it almost gives us permission to laugh ourselves.
You know what? Doesn't matter. As long as you remember it's Farm Bureau.
Farm Bureau.
Yeah.
Another way to use a reaction shot is if the gag happens off screen and all you have is the reaction. Then that causes the audience to imagine something that you can never really show visually. Lastly, try incorporating reaction shots earlier in the scene when you're setting up the joke, building tension for the big payoff. The last rule, get the sound right. Comedy isn't just about what you see, it's about what you hear.
Letting a parrot watch horror movies is wrong.
A well-placed sound effect can save a joke that's not working, and it can make a good joke become a great joke. And you don't have to go over the top here. Sometimes a subtle, realistic sound effect is just what a scene needs to make that joke pop. And don't just play with sound effects, experiment with music too. That could be just finding music that has the right vibe, that elevates the humor, but I would also urge you to experiment with music dropping out suddenly, so you have a contrast between music and silence, or music starting suddenly, maybe after a punchline. And as promised, here's your bonus tip. This applies particularly to editing parody. The key to great parody, in my opinion, is to copy the genre exactly, and then change one thing. And the comedy comes from that one out-of-place thing. The more precisely you mirror that original style, the funnier it'll be when you break it. So do your research, because you want the editing to match the original genre, including cutting patterns, sound design, and music. When I was working on this parody spot for Let Me Shine, it was all about nailing that cleaning commercial genre. Let's take a look.
ToxiClean cleans fast. The secret is our sparkles that damage red blood cells. Say goodbye to dirt and aquatic life due to our high levels of toxicity. Ingredients may shrink testicles and cause fertility problems.
What the f?
Do not question the ToxiClean.
Just because it cleans doesn't mean it's safe. For a clean that's safe and powerful, there's Let Me Shine.
The cutting style, the reaction shots, the use of sound design and music were all in the style of a cleaning commercial, with the only difference being, of course, that this ToxiClean product would ultimately kill you. Have you ever been in a situation like this? You have tons of footage, maybe even hours of footage. Your timeline's in utter disarray and you have no clear story. Where do you even start? Well, I've been in this situation many times, so today I'd like to invite you into my edit suite so I can share 4 big lessons I've learned over my 20-year career that will help you immensely with any of your documentary or interview editing, with concepts that you can start applying today. And at the end, I'm going to share why I strongly disagree with one of the most popular pieces of advice out there on documentary editing. So stick around. Let's dive in. So picture this. I was a 19-year-old kid in film school and I had just secured one of my first paid editing gigs for way less than minimum wage at the time, I'm sure, and it was for a feature-length documentary. So I sat down and in front of me on actual tape was the footage. It wasn't 10 hours of footage, it wasn't 50 hours of footage, it wasn't 100, it wasn't 150 or even 200 hours of footage, it was over 300 hours of footage. Talk about overwhelming. Lesson 1. What's the best way to waste days, weeks, months, even years of your life? Dive into a documentary editing project without a plan. Enough time has passed on this project where I think I can say that the filmmakers, and it was their first time feature, they overshot and underplanned. You might have a project that's going on that's sort of like this. You get a big pile of footage, but without any real clarity of a concept or structure. So you're kind of stuck with it. Well, what can you do? Well, as editors, you can make your own plan. And what this might look like is not quite a script or a screenplay, which would be too rigid for a documentary piece, but more like a story structure. The biggest benefit of having a story structure is that you can largely set aside content or storylines that don't fit within that structure, so you can start to narrow your focus. And with a feature-length documentary, you probably have a similar dramatic structure that you would have in a narrative film. You might start with the ordinary world of the protagonist, then an inciting incident kind of kicks off the story. You have a plot point that sends you into Act 2, a midpoint where things change, and at the end of Act 2, you'd have something called the big gloom, which is the lowest point for the protagonist, usually the saddest scene, the most hopeless scene of the film. That would take you into Act 3 with more rising action to get to a climax, and then finally a resolution. Now, if you're cutting something shorter, and I'll show you an example from a doc I cut that was only 2 minutes long, I think a simple way to look at it is cut up the story into 25% chunks and make sure things are changing at each of those major plot points. By the way, if you're enjoying this type of content, you might really like my free editing guide, which you can download at the link in the description. Once you've outlined your story structure, then you can dive into the audio. Notice I said audio and not visuals. In documentary or interview-based filmmaking, the audio is the story. In a scripted narrative, you're really trying to build a visual story. In documentary, you're trying to find the story, and that comes from what people say. So I would even go as far to say that I like to create an entire cut of the movie where I'm really focused on audio. Yes, of course, my visuals are synced up, and we'll get to that in a moment. But if things are flowing and working from an audio standpoint, odds are you're onto something in terms of your story and your content. Now, I want to illustrate the power of having a structure when you're working on a doc or interview-based edit by showing you my timeline for a doc I cut fairly recently. And the subject of the doc is an environmentally friendly office tower going up in Austin, Texas. And the doc is only a little over 2 minutes. And if you look at my timeline, I actually color-coded the different sections of the doc as I saw them as I was crafting it. And look how close this is to it being 25% chunks like I outlined. I have this intro section setting up the world. Then I have 25% where they talk about the building kind of in a broad sense. Then this section here, the music shifts and we get more into the details of the building. And then finally, we have a climax resolution at the end of the piece. Having a structure in mind for this piece made the editing process so efficient and so fun to work on. And even more important than that, it made the final video so much more compelling because things changed every 25% roughly. And remember, audiences expect that when they're watching films and videos. It's ingrained in us. So that's why story structure can be so powerful. So you know to start with structure with your documentary and interview-based edits. You know to craft that structure by diving into the audio, not necessarily the visuals, which we'll get to in a minute. But now I want to dive even further into audio for our next lesson. So one thing I notice a lot with beginner editors, myself included when I started, is you kind of take the audio at face value. You try to find the best lines, you put them in a good order, and you sort of stop there. Now, as an experienced pro, I can tell you, you would probably be shocked at how much dialogue is manipulated in narrative, in commercials, but especially documentary. Now, we're not trying to tell lies or make it so manipulated that it's just not true or authentic, but what we're trying to do is make the most impactful story possible. What this looks like in my editing is I'm carefully listening to all the audio because a lot of times I end up taking a clip from over here and a clip from over here, and when you put it together, it creates that emotional impact you're looking for. And then another step I take is to exclude or cut out all the verbal distractors like the ums, the ahs, the likes, to make it sound more articulate. Like if you've ever watched a documentary where you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, these people sound so smart, that could be the editor's magic at work. And then another thing, which you might not think of, is I'm adjusting the lengths of pauses, either between words or sentences or paragraphs, to have them carry more impact or flow more naturally. Let's take a closer look at the timeline for the same doc I worked on. And I want you to pay particular attention to the waveforms. When you see a waveform clip like this, where it looks like nothing's happening, that's what's called room tone. And room tone is so helpful when you want to edit or manipulate the dialogue, because you can create your own pauses, but the sound of the room is still there, so it sounds natural. If everything dropped out, you'd be able to hear the edits. So this allowed me to adjust the cadence of all the dialogue. So not only am I cutting out takes and using clips from different takes, but I am in charge of the cadence of the speaking. And you can just see how many edits there are in this dialogue track. As you become more and more experienced, you realize the power in refining each and every frame. Now, before we move on, I want to point out an important caveat. I remember on one project, not this one, I was manipulating the dialogue. I was cutting out all the uhs and the ums, and I was really making it tight, really making the speaker seem as articulate as possible. And when I got to the end of the edit, I watched it, and it just seemed so sterile. I had actually lost the emotion I was going for. And what's funny is I actually went back and I cut back in some of those uhs and ums, some of those imperfections, and I let things breathe a little more, and the emotion came back. So while these are some of the tricks of the trade to manipulate and make things as streamlined as possible, always be cutting for that emotional target and try to notice if you're missing the mark. Now, there's a big danger to being so audio forward at the beginning of your edit, and it's this: unmotivated or unnecessary B-roll. So the lesson here is you've built out your story really thinking of audio, but once that's built out, I really want you to shift gears and give the visuals as much attention as you did the audio. I really want you to find images that add to the story and treat them with care. Don't treat them as just little pieces of footage covering up cuts. Treat them as a way to elevate the storytelling. Let's take a look at the first minute of the doc so you can see some of the structure and some of the B-roll choices that I made.
The experience of being in the perennial is really about peace. It's about a place where you can find balance.
Biophilic design refers to the methodology that allows us to incorporate nature's qualities and attributes into the things that we design.
On every floor, you could be easily connected to an outdoor space. So when you are here, you can do your best work. And that's that sort of contrast and balance we feel like is really exciting and unique to the project.
Being outside in nature is one of the times I feel the most relaxed, most comfortable. And so if you can bring that to the inside, you really start to have something special.
This next lesson is going to really level up your edits. I think one common misconception with documentaries or interview pieces is that they are real life, so they don't need or require or would even benefit from any extra sound design. And that's just not the case. In this documentary I've been showing you, the Perennial documentary, I was able to use sound design not only to elevate the images in the B-roll, but to almost create a sound brand. Remember, it's about an environmentally friendly office tower, and I was able to use strategically placed bird chirping and wind sounds and nature ambiances to give you that feeling of being environmentally friendly. So not only did the sounds elevate the story, but it elevated the whole idea of the project. And that's all through sound design. So I challenge you on your next project, whether it's a sit-down interview or perhaps a slice of life documentary, take a sound design pass where you're thinking a little bit outside the box in how you can elevate the story. I have one last lesson that I think will really take your doc and interview projects to the next level, and it actually flies right in the face of most of the popular documentary editing advice out there right now. And let me illustrate it with a story. I was working on a project that was basically a 2.5-hour interview, like back-to-back talking, and I had to cut that down. I think the finished video ended up being 10 minutes. So I thought to myself, I'm going to start by making a transcript and reading through it carefully and marking up all the best lines I thought there were. So I did this. I maybe spent half a day on it, and then I bring it into my editing software and I start finding the time code and start finding all those clips I had marked. And as I started that process, I would look and listen to that clip and think to myself, now why did I mark that? That's no good. I'd get to another one, be like, well, that's okay, but it's not as good as I remember reading it. And this kept happening and happening over and over. And maybe half of the clips I had marked didn't really live up to how they seemed on paper. So I scrapped the transcript and went back to my old process of just watching the footage carefully. And what's crazy is I ended up finding so many more great quotes that didn't even jump out to me in transcript form. And I think it comes back to this quote. It's 10% what you say and 90% how you say it. And I think that's so true for filmmaking. A transcript would be a wonderful way to put a book together, right? The written word. But we're making a film, not a book. So the audio and visual performance are key. And by relying too much on a transcript and not watching your footage, you're really missing out on the material that could take your edit to the next level. So my advice, which is contrary to a lot of the documentary editing advice out there, is stop using transcripts for your short documentary and interview projects. Now, I totally understand for longer projects, there's really no way around it to use a transcript at some level. But I would challenge you to watch as much of the footage as you possibly can, and don't rely on those transcripts as a crutch. One way to use a transcript that I think is helpful is maybe read it, skim through it, get a slight overview of everything that's said to sort of fill in that initial story structure we talked about at the first lesson in this video, and then maybe have it as a search tool. So if you're literally trying to find something within lots and lots of footage, you have the transcript so you can kind of do a text-based search to quickly move between clips. But at the end of the day, I don't want you to use a transcript as an excuse to not get familiar with your footage. Because one of the best traits of an editor is someone who really becomes intimate with their footage, because you never know what you're going to need to make an impactful story. You've probably heard that the best edits are the ones you don't notice, but I'm here to tell you that's not always true, especially when you're trying to evoke an emotion. My name is Austen Menges, and I've been a pro editor for over 20 years with a focus on broadcast TV commercials with budgets of $100,000 and higher. Today, I'd like to invite you into my edit suite so I can share a unique exercise that will help you practice an important concept that you can start adding to your own edits today. So editing is not just about seamlessly connecting shots, it's about adding contrast between them. So today I'm going to teach you 5 different ways to add contrast to your edits. And please watch all the way to the end, because the last lesson is the most important one of all, and it actually applies to all 5 of these examples. For this exercise, I'm using footage, sound effects, and music, all from Artlist, and I'm going to leave a link below so you can check it out and follow along. You can even download the assets when you're on a free trial. Yours will just be watermarked. And to start, let's watch the whole short sequence that I put together to illustrate all of these concepts. The first type of contrast I want to teach you is sound related. I get the chance to critique a lot of edits, and here's a problem I see a lot. An editor might finish their visual edit, and then for sound design, they only add in a couple of sounds for the whole piece. Like for this, for instance, they might pick a forest ambiance since the dirt bike rider is riding through the forest or the woods. And they might pick a motorcycle or dirt bike sound that's kind of long enough to fit under the whole edit. But in my opinion, a more effective way to work on sound design, and it's a way that creates a wonderful contrast, is to think about it like this. Next time you're working on your sound design, think about finding a different sound for each shot. And when you hard cut between the visuals, also hard cut between the sounds. So there's this contrast, new shot, new sound, contrast, new shot, new sound, contrast. So I'm gonna mute the music so you guys can hear the sound design a little better. And I wanna play through the sequence and identify when I've used this type of contrast. Okay, so that first shot was about footsteps, and you will see them here. It is 3 footsteps I've added. And the second sound was about a bird cooing. I think that's a dove. I don't know if there's doves in this part of the forest, but I thought it sounded right. It doesn't always have to make perfect sense. And then the next shot was about the motorcycle starting. Okay, I did start the sound of the motorcycle turning on before I cut to the close-up. That's known as a sound advanced cut, where you hear the sound before you cut to the next shot. It does create a nice seamless transition. So let's keep going. Now this was a hard cut shift in the sound design. So you'll see I go from this motorbike sound to this one, and it changes right on the edit. And I also have this dirt and debris sound. So this is a perfect example of what I wanted to illustrate. Now this shot was about birds again, a different type of birds here. And then I started this long whoosh, which was sort of the sound of this shot. Now here's one of the biggest uses of this sound contrast that I've been trying to explain, because there's also a contrast in the loudness of the sounds. But you'll see when we go to this dynamic shot of the motorbike riding by the camera, I have this, it's actually a rally car sound come on right at that hard cut. Let's watch that again. So this next shot was about the bike revving. So it's this rev happening right here. I did advance it before the edit, so it's not exactly a hard cut like some of the others. And then this is probably the biggest sound design contrast I added, where we go from this revving bike to this quiet moment as we see the bike riding through the trees. Okay, now there is a really nice hard cut right here, and this is actually the same sound effect, I believe. I just moved to a different part of it here and made a hard cut so you can sort of hear the shift, the contrast. This carries through these 2 shots, but then I have another shift happen here. And then I have this final whoosh at the end, and I end with more birds. By the way, if you like content like this, you should download my free editing guide at the link below. It's already helped thousands of editors. Now let's talk about music. Now, when I started as an editor, I remember doing something like this. I would kind of finish my visual edit, and then I would do a music search, and I really spent a lot of time trying to find a vibe in the music that worked with the visuals, and then I would pick my track and I would lay it under the whole edit and I would call it done. So while I did try to pick a song that really matched the visuals, I wouldn't do much to it until later in my career when I realized music offered up one of the biggest opportunities to add contrast to my edits. And that's what I want to show you today. What you can do with music, or one of the most powerful ways to use music, is to go from music to no music, meaning the music stops, or to go from no music to music, where the music turns on. And I have an example of both in the last half of this sequence. Okay, a big difference, right? That dropout in the music creates such a big contrast that it does evoke an emotion. And we have the quiet and loud contrast as well. And then when the music comes on, when that tire of the motorcycle hits the ground, it's really kind of a fun, energetic emotion that's evoked, at least when I watch it. And then you'll also notice the music edit at the end. Instead of just allowing the music to fade out, I actually chose a part of the music that felt like an ending, and I made a music edit. So the music ends when the piece ends, and that makes a big difference as well. I know that's not quite about contrast, but that's just a bonus tip I wanted to include as I was looking at it here. So next time you're going to edit your music for a piece, ask yourself, is there an emotion I'm trying to evoke in this piece? And one of the best tools in your tool belt should be manipulating that piece of music. And to make the biggest contrast for the biggest emotional impact, you're going to want to go from music to no music in a matter of frames, like I did here, or from no music to music. So think about that and give it a try on your next edit. Now let's shift from the soundtrack to the visuals. And one of my favorite ways to add contrast to the visual edits of a piece is through rhythmic contrast. In other words, changing how quickly I'm cutting in between shots or how long I'm staying on shots. Another way to talk about it is tempo, and we can measure tempo in cuts per minute. So let's say I'm making 10 cuts per minute on average, and then I switch to 5 cuts per minute on average. Well, you're going from a fast tempo to a slow tempo. You can also do the opposite, where you're going from a really slow tempo to a fast tempo. And I've color-coded my visual edits here so you can get a real sense of how long I'm staying on each shot. So at the beginning, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 shots in this amount of time. These are all about the same length, so that's establishing a sort of rhythm in those first 3 shots. And then I slow it down. Look how long the next 3 shots are. And that brings us to what I think is the biggest point of rhythmic contrast. Because look how long these 3 shots are. And then I have 1, 2, 3, 4 shots happen in roughly the same amount of time I had 2 shots happen. So I start editing, I start making cuts about twice as fast. And then coming out of it on the other side, I go from 1, 2, 3, 4 shots. And in about the same amount of time, I have another 2 shots. This shot in particular is very long. So let's watch through this part of the edit and see if you can feel, now that you've seen it, if you can feel the impact of the rhythm of the visuals changing. So that's a great way to add contrast to your edits. Think about establishing a rhythm or tempo and then changing it. And you don't have to change it as much as I did here. You could change it less, and that would be less of a contrast and maybe less of an impact. Or you could go even more extreme. Imagine if I had these 2 shots and they stayed about the same length, but instead of 4 shots in this span, what if I had 8? How would that make you feel? Those are the tricks you can use when you have this technique in your tool belt to elicit emotion. Let's shift back to the soundtrack here, and I'm going to show you another way I love adding contrast to my edits using sound design. So we already talked about trying to find a different sound for most of the shots, and then as you hard cut between the visuals, you can actually also hard cut between the sounds. Well, going a level deeper, it's not just about hard cutting between the sounds, but it's about how different are those sounds. You can go from quiet sounds to loud sounds, or you can go from different types of sounds, like a motorcycle revving to a quiet forest. And that's what I did here. When the music drops out, we go from a high revving motorcycle sound and we hard cut to a very quiet forest ambiance. So let's take a look and listen to that section. So not only did I hard cut between the sounds, but the sounds themselves had a major contrast. We go from a motorbike, which is a mechanical sound, it's loud, to a beautiful serene forest. And cutting between those 2 types of sounds makes an impact. And I did also do that. Well, at the beginning, we go from forest and footsteps to a motorbike turning on, which has a nice effect. And then this edit, I went from a quiet moment on the slow-mo of the bike going around this corner here to when we hit the normal speed fast bike zooming by in the next shot. And in my opinion, that creates a great effect, and it's something that you can start adding to your edits. Now, I want to talk about one other sound contrast that I utilized, and it requires a little bit of extra work beyond picking the right sounds. This is called a perspective shift. So when I'm talking about perspective, I'm talking about where the sounds feel like they're coming from. Because there's a big difference of what a motorcycle sounds like, for instance, if I'm riding it or if I'm listening to a motorcycle driving by 100 yards away. Now, to shift the sound perspective, you might have to find a different kind of sound, but you can also use mixing techniques to kind of change the perspective. And there was one place in particular I used this technique, and it was between these 2 shots right here. And basically, I go from a more present motorcycle sound effect, which is this, and then I cut to debris and dirt flying around and a different motorcycle sound effect. And I actually put some reverb on these 2 sounds to make them sound like a different perspective. And then I also slowed them down, which changes kind of the feeling of the sound. So let's listen to that. It's pretty subtle, but it does add a contrast, and I could have gone even further with that. So as you're hard cutting between sounds, you might also think about perspective. Now let's go back to visuals, and I want to share a few ways I was thinking about contrast as I was creating this edit. And one quick caveat is not all of these types of contrast are created equal, and you can certainly implement some of these less intense types of contrast in your edit just to build interest, and it won't necessarily make your edit any less seamless. And I'd say these are in that category. So let me talk about the visual language of film to start a little bit. Often we think about, as editors, going from a wide shot to a medium shot to a close-up. That's sort of the visual language to go in that order. So you might see scenes where things start far away and get closer little by little. Or you might start really close on something like a close-up, go out to a medium shot, and then get wide. So kind of going in that order. So one way to add contrast to your edit is to skip that middle shot. So go from a really wide shot to a close-up, or go from a close-up to a really wide shot. That's a subtle way to add some contrast. And I did that here. I went from, this is a relatively wide shot. It shows the whole motorbike in frame. And then I cut to this close-up of the guy in his helmet. I left in this alternate shot of a medium shot, which might be kind of a more standard way to cut, where it goes from him getting on the bike to a little bit closer than him riding around. But I chose a more extreme punch-in to add more contrast. I think that works nicely. Now, some other things I had access to with this footage in particular is I was able to use slow-mo footage and cut that with normal speed footage. And here's a good example of that. So that's a pretty powerful contrast to go from a slow-mo shot of a dirt bike to a full speed shot of a dirt bike. You might even want to speed that full speed shot up a little to increase the contrast. And then another thing I had access to, which you might as well, depending on what you're working on, is going from a static shot to a handheld shot. And right in the first two shots, I have a type of visual contrast because I start with this handheld shot and I cut to an almost static shot or two. Let's check it out. And those are some great ways, if you have the options in your footage, to add visual contrast to your edits. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned that a lot of people will tell you that most good edits are invisible, and there's certainly a case to be made for that, but I think I proved here that there's a wonderful place for adding friction and contrast to your edits when you need to make a powerful impact. And so the point I want you to take away from this is only use contrast as you need to in your edits to evoke an emotion. You think about what emotion you're trying to evoke in your audience, say in the opening 5 seconds of the piece you're working on. And you say, oh, I want to evoke this emotion. What are the tools in my editing tool belt that I can use to get that emotion? And if contrast comes to mind, then by all means, use contrast. Use as many or as few of these examples as you need to get at that emotion. And that's really what's going to make you go to the next level as an editor, is editing with intention. And not just taking these techniques and kind of sprinkling them through your edits, but using them with that intentional, deliberate mindset to evoke emotion in your audience. I've been a pro editor for over 20 years, and when it comes down to it, there are 5 simple ideas that have made the biggest impact on my editing. Today, I'd like to invite you into my edit suite so I can share them with you in the context of a broadcast commercial I recently completed, in hopes that you can take those 5 ideas and use them in your own edits. Stick around to the end because I have some editing wisdom I'd like to share with you that was a real game changer for me. Let's start by taking a look at the spot.
Texans. 140 years ago, they invented Lone Star beer. To survive in this scorching habitat, they've made an unlikely ally, the armadillo. This creature saves parched locals from thirst by supplying them with their favorite beer. A toast to Texas hospitality. Make every beer a Lone Star.
What's the first thing you do when you get a new editing project? When I started out, I would just start throwing footage in the timeline because I was so eager to get going. I just loved editing so much, I wanted to start. And I do think that's better than procrastinating, but I want to explain why it's still not ideal. The danger is this. Let's say you dive in, you're creating cut after cut, maybe you're getting a collaborator involved like a director or a producer. Also, maybe you have a tight schedule, so you're getting caught up in sort of the chaos of a tight post-production schedule. And then somewhere toward the end, when you're close to the finish line, you finally have a chance to sit back and watch what you've made. And you watch it and you realize it's just not that good. It's a big pile of nothing. I'm getting a sinking feeling just thinking about this because I've been in this position many, many times, more so at the start of my career. As an editor, it's my goal to prevent that scenario from happening. And of all the things I've tried, here's the one thing that works best. Always understand the why of your edit before you begin. And for me, the why is the emotion I want the audience to feel as they're watching the edit. It's best if you write it down, and it's even better if you share it with your collaborator so you can both get on the same page and go toward that common goal. For this commercial, the director and I were focused on the emotion of excitement. It's a party after all. And then a sense of delight when the armadillo is introduced, a sense of dread when the partygoer makes a horrible mistake in front of everybody, and then a sense of joy when the armadillo saves the day. If you want to go deeper on the topic of emotion, you can download my free editing guide at the link in the description. You might be thinking, great, so I pick an emotion and I get after it. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but there's a problem. It should almost never be just a single emotion. One issue I see over and over with beginner editors, myself included when I started out, is what I like to call a one-note edit. It can be any format, corporate video, montage, documentary, but there's just one note or one emotion throughout the edit. Nothing really happens, nothing really changes. Here's something that sounds simple but can take years and years to sink in. Story is about things happening to people, and then the people change because those things happen. I don't care how long your story is or what format your story's in. As editors, we must fight for things to happen and for people to change. And if things are happening and people are changing, there will be more than one target emotion in your edit. That's why it can be helpful to build out the story structure and the emotional targets of your edit at the same time. Let's take a look at the story structure of this commercial. First, we're introduced to the normal world, which is a party atmosphere. It's exciting. And then we're introduced to a new character. And then we have a complication. The guy brings the wrong beer to the party. We have a climax where the armadillo changes that beer into Lone Star. And then now we're back to the normal world, but it's forever changed. So you have some emotional targets and a story structure. Now it's time to start putting things together. I can't tell you how many projects I've worked on that would have been saved had I started with those two ideas. But you might be thinking, what can I do to target those emotions? Well, I'm glad you asked, but let me start with a question. As an audience member, what's one thing that'll pull you out of a story? For me, it's when I get ahead of it, meaning I know what's going to happen next. As editors, we spend a lot of time practicing how to develop a steady rhythm or tempo in our edits, which is great. But the problem is when you stick with a rhythm or tempo for too long and the audience starts to expect it. As soon as they expect it, they get bored and you've lost them. One thing I teach is called rhythmic contrast, where you develop a steady rhythm or tempo, but then you change it unexpectedly. Not only will this keep the audience engaged, but you can use these moments to emphasize an emotion. But be careful not to overuse this technique and make sure the point of change happens at a point in the story that makes sense. Let's take a look at the different rhythms in this commercial. I first establish a nice brisk pace to set up this party scene, the emotion of excitement. And then I introduce some rhythmic contrast when I introduce the main character. If you see this shot, if you include the crash zoom in to the dillo, is over twice as long as the previous shots. So I introduce the rhythmic contrast to introduce the new character. And then we're back to that faster rhythm I established at the beginning, but then I break it again. I slow it down again. At this point, the main complication of the story. And finally, the last shot, the joyful celebration of the beer turning into Lone Star, is one of the longest shots of the spot. And perhaps one of the most effective tools editors have to evoke emotion is the soundtrack. The music choice can do a lot of heavy lifting, but sound design can have a big impact as well. But there are a couple of things I see a lot with beginner editors, myself included when I started, when it comes to the soundtrack. The first thing is they'll pick a piece of music and they'll just let it play the entire time. This comes back to that idea of kind of a one-note edit. Also, the structure of the musical piece might not quite line up with the story of their edit. Let me show you what I did in this piece with the music to make it match the story and help evoke emotions. The music plays from the start and really helps nail that emotion of excitement. But then we have the music turning off, and that lines up with the biggest complication of the story, where this guy brings the wrong beer. It creates this awkward silence. And then when the armadillo saves the day and transforms that beer, we have the exciting music track start back up, which really helps sell that emotion of joy and celebration at the end of the spot.
A toast to Texas hospitality.
Another mistake I see beginner editors make is when they have an edit that is music-driven or voiceover-driven like this one, they will neglect adding specific sound design. And they're really missing out because specific sounds can help keep the audience engaged. It's introducing a new element. It can also guide the viewer's eye to different points in the frame. Let me show you what I mean. Just the subtle sound of the can being picked up draws your eye to it. The sound of the can coming out of the cooler. That subtle sound of the guy catching the beer.
This creature saves
the beer can opening
by supplying them with their favorite beer.
Somebody in the party going, ugh, like the guy really messed up. That little sound really helps sell this part of the story. And finally, the climactic sounds of the beer transforming.
Make every beer a Lone Star.
And even on this last shot, you can hear the wakeboarder yell, woohoo! By now you might be asking, are we going to make some actual edits? Yes, we are. My last editing criteria is action, or where to cut. This is where most editing tutorials start, but for me, it's the least important criteria, because if you're targeting emotions, have a solid story structure, and you're evoking those emotions through rhythm and sound, you've already won. You almost can't mess it up at this point. But we can get the edits right too. Let me take you through the spot, and we'll go cut by cut, and I'll share what I was thinking when I selected each in and out point. Shot 1 to shot 2 is a match on action. The actor lifts the beer in the first shot and continues lifting it up in the second shot. This is a way to draw the viewer's eye to an object in the frame, and it also creates a very seamless cut. Then the actor, Brian is his name, looks over and points to his friend at the bar. And then we cut to that friend at the bar. This is often called a glance object cut. Somebody glances at something and then you cut to what they're looking at. Very effective. Then we do a hard cut to the beer in the cooler, and the focus of this shot is the beer being lifted out of the cooler. And then this cut here almost gives you the idea that the beer's lifted out and then thrown to this other guy at the party, which is kind of a cool effect. Catches the beer. The end action of this shot is the guy in the background settling into frame. And then we have a hard cut to the armadillo and a smash cut in to a close-up of the armadillo, which is really treated as one single shot. This is another glance object cut because we're seeing the armadillo's eyes squint. He's looking at something, and we reveal he's looking at a can of beer. The focus of the beer can shot is the opening of the beer. Then we cut to these two friends, and the focus of this shot is the man wiping his brow because he's parched, which aligns up with the story of the voiceover. Then we cut wide to the party, and I cut into this wide shot to emphasize the awkwardness of his mistake. We whip pan over to the armadillo, zoom in, he works his magic, and then we have a graphic match of these two beers in the transformation, and an epic zoom out, lifts the beer. That's the end action of this shot. Then we hard cut to the armadillo relaxing by the lake, and the end action of the final shot is this wakeboarder going by. There you have it, the 5 simple ideas that changed my editing forever. Target emotions, tell a story, and evoke those emotions through rhythm, sound, and action. And let me leave you with one more piece of advice. If you're thinking to yourself, I wish I had an editing project that was advanced enough or well-written enough or exciting enough to apply some of these concepts to, but I just don't have one. I want to stop you there. I don't care what you're editing. It could be a corporate video, a home movie, or just some stock footage you're cutting together for practice. As editors, we can and should always fight to have target emotions and a story where things happen and people change. Then use all of your other editing skills to support those 2 things. Do that, and you'll be in the top 1% of editors. Have you ever struggled with changing music tracks within the same scene of your edit? Well, my name is Austen Menges, and I've been a pro editor for over 20 years with a focus on broadcast TV commercials. Today, I'd like to invite you into my edit suite so I can show you a bold way to change music tracks within a scene that pros use all the time. And by the end of this short video, you will be able to take this into your own edits. Let's dive in. So I'm in Premiere Pro here, and before I reveal the final edit that I've put together so you can see this in action, I want to talk about all the ingredients you need to make this work in your own edits. So first of all, you obviously need a first music track that can be playing at the start of your scene. And then, have you ever been in a conversation with a friend and it clearly felt like it was time to start talking about something new? Maybe they've been talking for a really long time. Well, you don't just start in and start talking over them and start telling your own story. What you do is you interrupt them first. Maybe you say, hey, do you mind if I throw something out there? Or hey, that reminds me, I have something I want to add to that. So you interrupt them, and then that gives you a chance to start telling your own story, and it feels natural. So what we're going to do to music track 1 within our scene is we are going to interrupt it. We're going to interrupt it with a sound effect. So ingredient 1 is your music track playing. Here's mine playing over this cool car footage. And then I interrupt that music with a sound effect. So for this to work, you need a shot in your scene that warrants a sound. And if it warrants a pretty aggressive sound, that can be enough to interrupt even a pretty aggressive music track like I'm doing here. And once we've interrupted the music track, which basically it allows us just to turn it off, now we have the opportunity to bring in a completely new music track when our sound effect is done. So the next ingredient you need is whatever music track you want to transition to, and that's what I have right here in this green clip. Now this also works with really subtle scenes, even dialogue scenes where you have kind of an orchestral score playing. You can even interrupt that with a specific sound effect that comes from a shot in the scene, and then once that music's interrupted, you have the opportunity to start a new music track, and maybe I'll do another example with a more subtle scene. If you like this video, please give it a like, and you might also like my free editing guide where I go deep into my main 5 editing criteria: emotion, story, rhythm, sound, and action. And now let's check out this music edit in action. Do you ever get the feeling that your edit sort of feels flat, but you can't quite put your finger on why? Well, my name is Austen Menges, and I've been a pro editor for over 20 years with a focus on broadcast TV commercials. And today I'd like to invite you into my edit suite so I can share a simple concept that will bring your flat edits to life. I'm in Premiere Pro, but of course this concept will work with any editing platform, and I'm going to show you it in action a little later, but first I need to explain why you should be editing like a Formula One driver instead of a driver on their morning commute. Imagine this, you have a Formula One track with all these twists and turns and straightaways, but instead of putting a Formula One driver on the track, you put someone who's on their morning commute and they have their car in cruise control. So how are they going to do on that track? Well, if their car's going at constant speed, they will be going far too slow on the straightaways, and when they get to the hairpin turns, they will likely crash from going too fast. The Formula One driver, on the other hand, is going to crush it because they know they need to change the speed based on what's happening on the track. They might go 200 miles per hour on the straightaways, and then it looks like they're coming to almost a complete stop on the hairpin turns. Now let's get back to Premiere Pro so I can show you the exact ingredients you need to put this concept into action. So the first ingredient is simply a series of shots, ideally edited in a steady tempo. So drivers use miles per hour to judge their speed, and editors, we can use cuts per minute to judge our tempo. Your footage might look something like this, and you could even calculate the cuts per minute if you want by simply taking a 1-minute sample of your shots and counting the number of cuts. Like in this 30 seconds I have here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 cuts in 30 seconds. So if I double it to make it a 1-minute sample, that would be 22 cuts per minute. The second ingredient is super important. I want you to identify a point of change in your story. Now, I realize this just might be a scene you're working on or some practice footage, so it doesn't have to be a super complex change, but it should be something new being introduced or something happening. Remember, Formula One drivers don't just change their speed randomly, they change their speed as a reaction to what's happening in front of them, and we should do the same. Ingredient 3 is that I want you to go to that point of change you identified, and I want you to change the tempo or cuts per minute to match the story. Here's a couple of simplified ways you could think about it. If the story change requires more energy, I want you to increase the cuts per minute. If it requires more of a moment of introspection or less energy, I want you to decrease the cuts per minute from that story point on. So you kind of end up with these two sections, two different tempos that are reacting to what's happening in the story. Now, this is obviously a simplified example, but it's pretty much how pro editors are approaching their edits. We're never just on cruise control. We're always reacting to the story and changing our tempo based on the emotions we're targeting. If you like this video, please give it a like, and you might want to download my free editing guide where I explain my 5 editing criteria: emotion, story, rhythm, sound, and action. You can find that at the link below. And now let's take a look at this concept in action from a short film I edited where I go from a pace of about 10 cuts per minute all the way to a pace of about 33 cuts per minute as a boy sees some bad guys and a chase ensues. Let's check it out.
¡Él lo tiene! ¡Ve por él!
Have you ever spent hours learning a big flashy visual effect only to realize it doesn't actually work for your edit? I've been cutting broadcast TV commercials for over 20 years, and what I've learned is this. It's the simple VFX that pro editors reach for again and again. In this video, I'll show you 5 VFX you'll actually use that will instantly add a high-end polish to your edits. Let me start with one that saved me more times than I can count, and it'll do the same for you. VFX 1. When I first started editing, if a scene wasn't working, I'd often reach for big flashy effects to try to fix it. But once a mentor told me, hey, before we reach for anything big, let's just make a few small tweaks first. And he was right. The real fix is usually a series of small, intentional moves. So remember, it's not about how flashy your visual effect is, but it's why you're using it. The most important thing when it comes to visual effects is intention. Here's an example. So I'm in Premiere Pro, and in my timeline, I have a shot of NFL Hall of Fame quarterback Brett Favre on the left here, and an insurance salesman on the right. And this is from a commercial I cut. And when I was cutting this commercial, I realized that the best take of Brett's performance was different than the best take of the sales guy's performance. Because the camera was static and the two characters didn't overlap, I was able to use a very simple visual effect called a mask. Here's the finished shot. Let me show you.
Favorites.
Favorites.
But you'll see I have 2 video layers here. Well, what's going on? Well, let me show you what's on video layer 1.
Favorites.
Favorites.
You'll notice you heard Brett speaking in the final audio track, but he wasn't speaking in the video. Well, that's because I was able to use a different take of Brett. Let me show you what's going on just in video track 2.
Favorites.
Favorites.
So basically, I put a simple mask around Brett, and I was able to combine the best performances from both takes. If I click on Brett here and click the mask, this is simply in the effects control panel under opacity and mask, you will see how I simply drew the mask with the pen tool around Brett here, and that basically reveals the shot underneath in this blank area on the right. So when I turn on both layers and show the mask, this is how it looks. But I didn't stop there with improving the shot. I could also adjust the rhythm of the shot by having Brett deliver his line wherever I wanted, really. Because you see, I have his audio disconnected from the main take. So if we go back to look at the original take, you will see that he actually says his line a lot earlier. You'll see it will be out of sync with the final audio.
Favorites.
Favorites.
But once you have this mask and his audio, I could really move it anywhere. And I could have his line come up right before the salesman's line, like this.
Favorites.
Favorites.
Where they're almost on top of each other. So that simple mask not only allowed me to enhance the performance of the characters in this shot, but it allowed me to completely change and improve the rhythm of the scene. And if you want to dive deeper into rhythm and my other top editing criteria, download my free guide at the link in the description. VFX 2. This shot is from an anti-smoking commercial I edited. And at first glance, it looks simple. A cat knocks over a jar of glitter and walks across the frame. But that moment is actually built from several different elements. A lot of editors who are early in their career think it's all about just picking the best take and moving on. But once you know these little tricks, you can start getting the most out of every shot. So it seems like a pretty simple shot. The cat knocks over a cup full of glitter, adding to this big glittery mess on the floor, and then the cat walks off frame. But there's actually a lot going on to make this shot happen, and let me show you layer by layer. So the first layer is nothing. This is what we would call a clean plate. So now we can start adding on top of that. The second layer, and let me show you the mask in my effects controls panel. So what I'm doing with this shot is I'm actually masking out the cat trainer who was letting the cat go before it jumped down and knocked over the glitter and walked off frame. So I currently disabled my mask, and now I'll enable it, and it's basically revealing the clean plate underneath. Let me show you this mask in time throughout the shot. So the way I was able to have the mask move is I used simple keyframes. So you'll see my keyframes here, Every time I wanted to move the mask, I would set a new keyframe using this button, and then I would change my position and let the software do the rest. So let's keep adding layers here. What do we have next? Well, I have the cup of glitter, and if I click on the mask, you will see the mask around the cup, and you will see I had to adjust the mask quite a bit as the glitter spilled and came toward the camera. And again, I've simply used the pen tool to set the mask, then I create keyframes and adjust the shape of the mask. And then finally, I have one more jar of glitter that we got as part of another plate when we decided, well, wouldn't it be great if we can make it seem even messier? So this is just a static jar of glitter in the background. And then when you put them all together, you get the shot that I showed you at the beginning. So on your next editing project, ask yourself, how can I use simple masking to combine the best elements from multiple takes of a single shot? Now let's look at a technique that can completely change the feel of a scene. VFX 3. You probably already adjust the speed of clips all the time, but here are 2 ways to use speed adjustments that might surprise you. Most editors only think to use speed changes for montages or flashy transitions, but did you know you can also use them in dialogue scenes? For this commercial, the premise is that it's an auctioneer who speaks really quickly, officiating a wedding, which is a pretty funny idea. And the actor did a wonderful job on set, but when we were in the edit, the director and I decided it would be even funnier if he was going a little faster. So we actually sped up his visual and audio by 20%. And when you speed up audio, it's going to pitch shift it up so it'll sound higher pitched like Alvin and the Chipmunks. But we simply put on a pitch shifting effect to bring it back down to normal. And we ended up with this shot that I'll show you now.
Having a livestock auctioneer officiate a wedding is wrong. Any objections? Any objections? I need one objection. Who's got my objections? Speak now, forever hold your peace. Right now. I got one. How about 2? 2 objections. 2 objections.
Here's another trick. You don't have to speed up an entire shot. Remember this cat jumping across the frame? Well, maybe you like the pace of the cat's walk, but you want the leap to have more of a punch. Well, I might place a cut after the cat jumps, maybe right here. And then maybe I'll just adjust the speed of the initial part of the jump by 10%, like this. I'll close the gap. And let's see if that added a little energy to the shot. It's fairly imperceptible, which is good. You want visual effects to not be too noticeable, but it does add a little extra energy. And I use small speed changes like this on parts of shots all the time. Now I'm going to show you another trick that has saved me so many times. VFX 4. Every frame counts in editing, right? Because sometimes you just need to hold a moment a little longer, even if it's just by a few frames. Yes, AI tools like generative fill can create new frames, but it's just not reliable enough for high-end work. Luckily, there's an old school trick that just works. It's called looping. Let's say we're working with the shot of this writer at his desk, and the camera cuts right before we thought the shot should cut, just by, let's say, 6 frames. So I'm going to go to the end of this shot here and go back a few frames, make a cut, then I'm going to copy and paste that clip to the end of the shot, and I am simply going to reverse the speed. And now let's take a look. Now, when we play this, it simply plays to the end of the shot, then reverses back 6 frames, which can look pretty seamless and give you that extra little bit of shot you needed to fit the rhythm of the scene. And this works particularly well when there's minimal movement in the camera and minimal movement in the frame, so the reversing is less noticeable. Now let me show you one final technique that can tie all these together for a high-end cinematic feel. VFX 5. Think about your favorite movies or TV shows. The camera is rarely perfectly still. There's almost always a little bit of motion in the frame. But a lot of the effects I've shared, like masking, work best with static cameras. So what can you do? Well, you can add your own digital movement. But the key is intention and subtlety. One of the biggest mistakes I see, especially in YouTube editing, is adding too much movement or unmotivated movement. That really just distracts from the story. Let's say we wanted to add a subtle digital push in to this shot. Okay, I've got my clip selected. I'm in my effects control panel and I'm working with scale. I'm going to put a keyframe at the beginning of the shot, and I'm going to put a keyframe at the end of the shot, and I'm simply going to adjust the scale by a couple percent at the end. Let's see how that looks. Very subtle, which is a good thing for a visual effect, but it does add that nice little sense of movement. Here's another tip. You can layer your digital moves on top of existing camera moves if you want to push the emotion a little further. In this shot, we added a very subtle digital push in, and we also did to this shot, which already had a camera move. But start subtle. Just a 2 to 4% push in, almost imperceptible, can make a static shot feel more cinematic. Try it on one of those static shots you used a mask on to draw out a little bit more of that emotion you're targeting. Congratulations for making it this far. That means you're probably very serious about your editing career. And if you want to go deeper while working directly with me on high-end spec commercials for your showreel, click the link in the description to check out my editing program. You now have the skills you need to go pro, but it won't help you if you don't know how to get hired. So watch this video next to unblock the 5 things standing between you and high-paying editing work. Happy editing.